Thank you very much for coming. This is the official start now. I'm Rebecca Townsend, a member of Trains in the Valley, a local organization that was co-founded by Ben Heckscher to my left over here, and Zane Lemulski to my right over here. Tonight's event is going to feature John Bernick. Ben is going to introduce him. Just a couple of overall housekeeping details. There's an exit in the back should we have an emergency, and an exit over here this way. And that says it's a fire exit as well.
No.
It says do not block the door, but
there's no sign.
But there's no sign. But I mention it just in case. The presentation tonight will come first, and then there'll be a time for question and answer. We have some questions already figured out over there, but I'm sure you'll have your own. There's a lot of literature. Feel free to take that. Feel free to take a lanyard or one of the pens. And generally, I want to say thank you. It's been about 10, 11 years since we last held a meeting on rail in this room, and I'm thrilled to be bringing it back full circle and reporting on progress that there will be a train coming this May. So let me have us welcome Ben to the front, and
Thank you, Becky. I'm just going to give a little brief talk before our primary speaker here. First of all, I thank you all for coming out on this cold evening. We had 40 people registered for this event, and maybe we learned a lesson scheduling an event 2 weeks before the holidays. Zane and I put together this group, Trains in the Valley, about 2 years ago now. And we held our first meeting in April of 2016 in Northampton at Union Station. The primary reason we put it together was we were frustrated with the amount of information that was available about rail services in Western Massachusetts. We were a little frustrated about sort of the pace of activity related to rail service in Western Massachusetts, and we wanted to sort of improve that situation. We held a kickoff meeting in Union Station, Northampton, and walking into that meeting was Rebecca Townsend, who about 10 years ago had started up a similar group that for various reasons changed over time and sort of went away. And we sort of independently sort of came back and sort of resurrected the idea of local advocacy for passenger rail services in Western Mass. So we put together a group called Trains of the Valley. We were very surprised and thankful that the domain name was available on the internet, to our surprise. And we're focused on advocating for passenger and also freight service in Western Mass. Now, what does that mean, advocating for rail services in Western Mass? A lot of that is the internet, which is what you see here. And for those of you who haven't seen our website, I would encourage you to look through it. It has a wealth of information. You won't find, not to slight our state government, but you won't find the quantity and the quality of information that's on this site on the Massachusetts DOT website. The state website is effectively silent on many issues related to rail transportation, with the exception of the MBTA, which is really a focus in this state, obviously, because a lot of things related to rail and a lot of other things in this state, I'm sort of new to the state, having only been here for 4 years, are centered out of Boston. So we wanted to move some of that discussion out here to the Springfield area, to the Pioneer Valley. So we put together the website. For the past 2.5 years, we've been talking with people. We've been talking to elected officials. We've been talking to planners. We've been talking to people that would listen to us talk to them about this. And just talking to a lot of people on the platforms, people on the trains, just hearing people, and then using that information to communicate back with decision makers and influencers that are involved with projects like we're going to hear about tonight. What are we really pushing for? We're pushing for, obviously, anything we can do to help what's happening with Connecticut, with bringing the Hartford Line service up to Springfield, getting so-called north-south rail, which is additional service north of Springfield. Many of you are probably aware that we have one train today that runs in each direction up to St. Albans in Vermont, which is our primary rail line through the Pioneer Valley north of Springfield. And just some interesting information that just happened last night. The Senate of Canada has approved a new bill related to pre-clearance, which is a big step for the Vermonter to actually cross the border and go back to Montreal Central Station. That's passed the legislature in Canada. They have to pass certain regulations. There's a lot of work that has to happen at Central Station. But within a few years, everyone tells us that there will be the time once again when we have a train that runs through the Pioneer Valley and terminates in Montreal Central Station, which for a lot of people around here who have French-Canadian roots, that's a big deal. I mean, most people out here in Western Mass travel down to New York City, but we expect a lot of people are going to be traveling north to Montreal once the service comes up. So that's sort of a little bit of the background about Trains of the Valley and what we're trying to do. We've decided that we want to start a sort of a program of public events to actually get in front of people and talk to people. This is our first kickoff meeting. Our next meeting will be February 1st. It's our planned date up in Greenfield at the Over Transit Center. We have a rail expert from Vermont who's going to come down and speak on a topic which we'll talk about later. But first, I'm going to get my notes now and do my introduction for John. And I have to read this. John Bernick currently serves as the Assistant Rail Administrator for Rail Design, Construction, and Maintenance of Way at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. He is responsible for managing engineering and construction activities on the state's entire rail infrastructure, both passenger and freight, and a number of initiatives related to enhanced regional rail service on Amtrak's infrastructure throughout the state. Projects of national regional significance that John currently has direct oversight of include the replacement of Connecticut's movable bridges between New York and New Haven on the Northeast Corridor, and the expansion of regional rail service on the Hartford Line between New Haven and Springfield. John is a registered professional engineer in the state of Connecticut and holds a bachelor's degree in civil and environmental engineering from Clarkson University in Potsdam, New York. And with that, I'd like to introduce John Bernick, who will give us our presentation this evening. Thank you.
All right, thanks. And I'm very happy to be here, talk about this exciting service, the Hartford Line. Coming in 2018, enhanced rail service between New Haven and Springfield. Right now, there's only 6 round trips a day that run between New Haven and Springfield. 2 of those go all the way down to Washington, D.C. Of course, you're familiar with the Vermonter. Goes from St. Albans all the way down to Washington. There's a regional train, the 141, 148, that comes out of Springfield, goes all the way down to Washington. And there's 4 shuttles that run New Haven to Springfield every day. That is what they call a state-sponsored service. It's pre a 209 service for those of you who know your combined Federal Register. And it's state-sponsored. And so the states of Vermont, Massachusetts, and Connecticut have a 3-party agreement by which the cost of that service is divvied up with some of the costs being borne by Amtrak, and that's how that service is paid for. Connecticut has gone ahead and invested quite a bit of money into enhancing that service and increasing that Amtrak service, but then layering on the Hartford Line, which is additional trains that will be operated by the state of Connecticut, which bring the total number of trains from 6 round trips a day between Hartford and New Haven to 17 round trips a day. Up to Springfield, you'll go from 6 round trips a day to 12 round trips a day. So the service here into Springfield will double. Fast, frequent service. Runtime between Springfield and New Haven is, I think, 1 hour and 20 minutes. It's about 45 minutes from Hartford down to New Haven. About a half hour from Springfield down to Hartford. Connections, it's really all about connecting services and transportation modes that are somewhat disconnected now. Connections to Bradley Airport from Hartford. We're going to have a dedicated express bus service that runs from Hartford Union Station and goes out to Bradley. Of course, down in New Haven, you have all the meets for the trains, both the Amtrak trains, the Excella service, and the Metro North service, and the service will be timed so that certain trains meet certain trains on the Northeast Corridor so you can continue your trip. Also, not mentioned here is the CT Fast Track service, which is Connecticut's bus rapid transit service, which launched a couple years ago. And that runs into Hartford from the I-84 corridor, captures quite a few, not only New Britain, but a lot of surrounding towns in a network. And that also will have a connection at Hartford. So investing in rail, in total, about $600 million in federal and state bonds went into the construction that enabled this to happen. Back in the 80s, that line was double-tracked over its entire length. The Amtrak took up a lot of those tracks and left a bunch of passing sidings. At the time, passenger rail was on the decline. It was cost-effective for them to do that. And we went back and replaced a lot of that. You'll see of course, everybody wants to know about the track construction machine. I'll show a video of that here in a moment. What's the payout of $600 million? It's really all about livable and walkable communities. It's a quality of life issue. So for the communities along the line, it takes a bunch of disconnected rail services, disconnected bus services, communities in cities like Springfield and Hartford and Meriden that have population centers but are otherwise disconnected from the rest of the state and the rest of the region except for by the automobile. And so now it links all those things together. I'm going to talk a little bit more about transit-oriented design. The real win and the real payout here for this investment is that when people stop living where they can drive and living where they can access transit. And so when people start living near the stations, that's a demographic currently that we're losing. It's a demographic that are moving to other states and other regions in more urbanized areas. It's the younger set coming out of college that is looking to have things at their fingertips, things within walking distance, and they're not necessarily interested in owning a car. They're not necessarily interested in living in the suburbs. They're looking for a more urban lifestyle, and this project really speaks to that and sets up the transportation infrastructure that allow those communities to grow in that way. Of course, links to the greater regional rail system. I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. In economic development, we're already seeing that. We haven't even launched the enhanced service yet, and Meriden is just every day in the paper I see there's another development that is being initiated there. Regional vision. When we went for the original FRA high-speed intercity passenger rail grants, which was really the way that Connecticut was able to leverage this, we looked at, and I remember when Commissioner Redeker, who's our transportation commissioner now, he gave a speech back when he was the Public Transportation Bureau chief, and he showed a Google night map of New England, and the Google night map, let me see if I can do the pointer here, showed a concentration of lights that start in New York City, run up to New Haven, and then turn north towards Hartford, and that's where the sort of path of lights, heavy concentration of lights, of course that shows development, right? Much of this part of the state is dark, much of this part of the state is dark. So doesn't it make sense to link up where the people are, right, where the lights are? And so we went after quite an ambitious program. Our original vision was to have a 30-minute headway in both directions, 25 round trips a day. It meant full double tracking. It meant a number of additional stations. And it really did count on, for the future build of what is commonly referred to as the inland route, which is the subject of the Northern New England Rail Initiative, which you may be involved in. If you start to think about the overlapping service, and if you look at the material that was produced out of that study, you'll see that that 25 round trips a day, that 30-minute headway, comes from a combination of services that are overlapping each other. That was our original vision Of course, the money from the federal government had to be spread out across the nation. We didn't get everything that we asked for, and so we scaled back somewhat to basically what you see here on the left, which is the current launch. We'll have stops in New Haven. Union Station is a commuter stop that serves the Shoreline East that we've added a platform to so we can serve the Hartford line off of it. That's as far as walkability and livability, that's a major player because from that station, there's no parking at State Street Station, only at Union Station in New Haven. From State Street Station, you basically walk up the hill and you're at the New Haven Green, a big employment center, Yale University, the hospitals. I know a guy who owns a coffee shop right on that route, and he makes quite a killing, he says, he has his steady customers that come off the Shoreline East service, and I said, well, in May, I'm going to bring him a whole lot more customers, and he was very happy with that. The current stops are Wallingford, Meriden, Berlin, Hartford, Windsor, Windsor Locks, and of course Springfield. We'd like to add stations in North Haven, in Newington, in West Hartford, and in Enfield. Those are in design now, but construction funding is still pending on those. But there are future plans to expand the service. Right now, the double tracking that we added goes up just to Windsor. And then there's a section through Windsor Locks that's still single track, and then right around Enfield, it goes back to double track on into Springfield. Many destinations. As I mentioned, right now there's 2 round trips that are through trains all the way to Washington, D.C. There's lots of connections to service both east and west once you get down to New Haven. Of course, the Metro North service, peak hour runs just about every 20 minutes. And lots of connecting bus services in the individual communities, and also the CT Fast Track service, which has been a major, huge success for us in Connecticut. It was a much maligned project. A lot of people couldn't get their heads around who's going to want to take a bus, who wants to take a bus from New Britain. Well, apparently there's a lot of people. What was lost was the fact that this was a major collector. In that corridor, which is somewhat spread out and very much sprawled, a bus rapid transit service was the right answer. Because it was able to capture, of course a bus can leave the guideway, and it can capture all those individual communities, bring them onto the guideway, bypass the nightmare of traffic that is I-84 between Hartford and Waterbury, and get people into Hartford. Now you plug in the major artery of the Hartford line as a rail corridor, and this really starts to, they start to bolster each other and really be a multiplying factor. CT Fast Track talks about how hungry the corridor is for a mass transportation option. They exceeded their 10-year ridership estimate in the first 6 months. Just blew right through it and kept on growing. And what I tell people is, and they say, well, you know, is there a market for public transportation, for a mass transportation option like the Hartford line? And I say yes, because Fast Track proves it. We plugged in a mass transportation option, people just jumped on it. It was a good service, it was a reliable service, and it became a huge success. This now really lays the path for us. We can now take that and really puts Hartford in a really great position as far as a place to live and a place to work. Our new stations, that's Wallingford Station, that's my hometown. Well, we added, Wallingford was, there's an historic station building there, but the building is actually owned by the town of Wallingford. It has no rail function, there is no waiting area in it. They use it, I think, for adult education. And so the rail stop in Wallingford amounted to an asphalt sidewalk and a sign that said Amtrak. And that was about it. We relocated it to a spot just to the north because if we put the high-level platform in, it would have blocked two major roads through the center of town. The station that we built, and what you see here is it's a pretty formidable structure, but that is not a station building. That is the staircase that goes up to the up and over bridge. And so the up and over bridge goes through there, comes down the other side. The stairs do a zigzag up here, and then on the right you have the elevator cores. And then in here is basically a pretty large vestibule. Offers some shelter. There's variable messaging in there, so you can see the schedule. You can see when the next train's arriving. On the platforms, they're heated platforms. There's hydronic heating running underneath. Keeps them free of snow and ice. I was asked on Saturday morning to get up and actually drive over there to make sure it was working because we had snow. And I was happy to say that it's working. It's working wonderfully. And high-level boarding is important because when you up the frequency, you start to have trains with less headway. You want to have a reliable service. You know, it's the Metro North service from New Haven into Grand Central. If it's considered on time, if it arrives within 6 minutes, and Metro North runs 93 to 94% on time. So of course the commuters in Connecticut still complain about that missing 6%, but it's pretty good, right? And so right now the service that Amtrak runs, not so much. If you've got to board someone that's mobility impaired, you know, that's an issue. It takes more time. If you need to load somebody in a wheelchair, they've got to pull out this platform lift. It's this crank-up platform lift. The conductors pull it out to the train. You load somebody on the wheelchair, and you literally crank them up by hand, load them on the thing. Well, there goes your 6 minutes, right? And so if you've got a connection that you want to hit in New Haven to continue your trip, let's say to Stamford, Bridgeport. I know people in Wallingford that work in Fairfield. You're not going to want to wait for that. And so the high-level boarding is important. With the high-level boarding, you simply roll right onto the train. It's 4 feet over the top of rail. And so that was very important. They're 500-foot-long platforms. And they have canopy coverage, lighting, blue light phones, messaging systems, you know, scrolling displays, tells you when the next train's coming. Quite an upgrade. We added that also at Meriden. Berlin is finishing up construction now. They lost their historic station building. It was a separate project. It doesn't affect us, but it was kind of a bit of a tragedy there, and it kind of set construction back there a little bit. At Hartford Union Station, we added a high-level platform up on the viaduct there, a shorter platform, but it'll still serve our needs. Windsor and Windsor Locks are still on the low-level platforms. Once again, our funding didn't cover that, but they're next on our list for upgrades when funding's available. And of course, Springfield Union Station has undergone their own beautiful renovation project. I was in there not too long ago, and very, very pleased with what I see there. These stations now become a hub for development, and once again, it's really the transit-oriented development part of it. Having development concentrated, more density than what people are normally used to in towns like Wallingford, towns like Windsor, Windsor Locks. But this is the market right now. Affordable housing, livable, walkable communities, things in the center of town, city like Meriden, town like Wallingford, even Berlin, which is sort of lost its town center, but is desperately seeking to recapture it. They're already set up for this. They're already very, very walkable, livable towns, but sort of the migration to the suburb is sort of stolen away from that. Now there's a demographic that's looking to move back to that wants to live within the center of these communities, have things on their fingertips. I'm talking about the younger generation. They're just getting out of school. They're loaded down with a lot of student loans. They're looking for a cheap housing option. And so a condo, an apartment, near transit. The sort of the story I tell is if you live in Connecticut and you're married, you need 2 cars. It's a requirement, right? Because you can't get anywhere. I mean, there's not even a sidewalk in front of my house up in Wallingford. So, you know, my wife works, I work, we need 2 cars. That's it. Why? You know, if we had a condominium near Wallingford Station, we'd get by one car. I would commute into work on the rail. She would have the car to work during the day, or vice versa for that matter. And that works. And I know plenty of people in the Boston area that do that. And it's a choice. You know, it's a lifestyle choice that is in demand. And because we can't offer that in Connecticut, we're losing that demographic. That demographic is now going to Boston, it's going to New York, it's going to places elsewhere in the state where they can have that kind of lifestyle. And so this transportation infrastructure really enables that. And now it's up to the communities who are already jumping on this to develop around those stations and really leverage the investment that Connecticut has made. As far as the construction, this is sort of the gee whiz stuff. People always want to hear about rail construction. We upgraded 31 bridges, 12 railroad crossings. You can see the concrete panels there, and a lot of new equipment. 2 tracks now in places where there's only 1 track. We have a big Operation Lifesaver effort going on to educate the public about safety around the grade crossings. 27 miles of additional double track. I'll show you the video here in a minute of the track laying machine. The new stations I already talked about, the high-level platforms. Everything is pretty much finishing up now. We had a section of track that was added. We call it Phase 3A North. It's the section of track from the north side of Hartford up through Windsor. It was funded with money that Florida gave up. Because they didn't want to spend it. It was the $30 million that FRA threw back out to the states in competition, and we were able to secure $30 million. I think we put $20 million in state bonds against it, and that funded some additional track work. We didn't really need it, but what it does is it gives us a little bit robustness in the schedule, such that if you have a late train or if a train's delayed for some reason, you can recover more quickly if you've got more passing room north of Hartford. Okay, so the track laying machine, there's sort of an overhead view of it, and we had a contractor. Amtrak managed a lot of the track construction. They had a contractor come in, lay the roadbed. They strung the rail out, these long quarter-mile strings of rail, and then this track laying machine comes in and in a very automated fashion places the ties, drags the rail up onto the ties, and there's a machine that clips it and builds what we call the skeletonized track. And then from there, the surfacing gangs come in, put the ballast in, and bring it up to grade. And so with that, can you go ahead and run that video? Now you can see the ties feed in on a conveyor belt, and it just plops them down. And then there's that shuttle cart that runs back and forth. Maybe you'll see it move here in a minute. There you go. It's a little faster than it actually works, but that gives you the idea. So there's a guy there, he spots the ties, and there's the shuttle, runs back, picks up the ties, drops them off on the conveyor, runs back and gets more. Yeah, a little faster than a bunch of guys with sledgehammers. That's for sure. And there's what the term is skeletonized track, and then the surfacing machines come through, and they're computer guided and laser guided, and they set the exact grade, the super elevation, all the finer points. It was quite an effort to design this track on 1860s vintage roadbed, with the bridges and historic structures there. You know, we had Dave Staplin, who was their vice president for track construction, up here every 2 weeks. For a design coordination meeting, and boy, I learned more about track construction than I ever did from him. Just the way, I mean, there's bridges, I mean, we're talking mere inches of clearance, and then we said, well, gee, you know, we could get 10 more miles an hour on this curve if we super elevated the track a little bit more, and then put in some little more underbalance, and then we'd tweak it again, and the spirals and all the transitions and whatnot. So you're gonna hear a lot coming up here starting after the new year. We have quite a big marketing effort that we're gonna launch. You're getting the initial sort of the first, those are the first generation of swag over there, the lanyards and the pens and stuff and the car magnets. So you can consider yourself an early adopter if you pick one up. But there's more stuff coming, and we want to be out in the news. We want to have ads. We've got focus groups going on. We need to understand our market better. There's been a lot of buzz. I just was featured in the Hartford Business Journal. The reporter called me up and said, so what does this mean for employment and mobility of employees in the region? I'm like, it's all about that. That's why you make the investment. You can now move your employees. Employers have access to a bigger market for their employment. It's about jobs. It's about people's access to jobs. It's about living in Meriden and saying, well, I can't work in Stamford. I can't get down there. You know, my wife needs the car, you know, that kind of thing. And well, now you can work in Stamford if you live in Meriden. You know, that's definitely a possibility. And there's a lot of jobs up and down the state that would benefit, and a lot of employers that would benefit from having casting a wider net for employment. Of course, the casino. Somebody mentioned the casino for me. We can send employees up here for that. That's for sure. Transit-oriented development. The picture there you see, and you're going to see a picture of the front of the building here in a minute. That's the courtyard in Meriden. That's a brand new building that used to be a parking lot. On the left side is a parking garage that Connecticut contributed funding for, so that we could get additional parking for the rail station. So transit-oriented development is having higher density housing, commercial, retail, centered around a transit stop. That's what it is. And what it does is it feeds off the transit stop. It works by having that access to that mode of operation, to that mobility, so that you have, once again, and I'll say it over and over again, a livable and walkable community. Of course, connectivity between different transportation modes. I'm going to go forward to the next because that's the greatest picture right there. That's the 24 Colony Street. It was a partnership between Connecticut Department of Transportation, Department of Housing, Economic Development, OPM, our environmental protection people, all came together to make this happen. And it was a private development. There were some housing grant monies and things, and he made it work, you know, in Meriden, which, you know, living in Wallingford, people kind of roll their eyes at Meriden. You know, they go, Meriden, what's ever going to happen up there? You know, it's kind of run down. And not anymore. There's at least 3 additional developments going right now. They took this ill-conceived mall that was across the street from the train station, demolished it, opened it up to a park, used it as flood control because they had historic flooding there in Meriden, but had this open park. They just had a big festival down there with bands and whatnot, and it's right across the street from this, and Meriden is booming, and we haven't even launched service yet. And so this now becomes a pilot project for a lot of other work that's happening up and down the corridor, and you can see here, I think that's in Windsor, Windsor Locks. Windsor Locks just got a developer on board for the old Montgomery Mills site there, right out next to the canal, between the canal and the river, which was an old burned out factory. They've been looking to develop it forever. They want to add a pedestrian bridge over the canal that links up to where the new station site will be. And once again, you know, you live there in a condo, you got a nice view of the river, you walk out your back door, across the pedestrian bridge, you're on the train, you're going to work. And that's what they're looking for. They had a first selectman there. He's no longer in office, but he was just adamant about moving that station back to town. We went up there for a public involvement meeting, and he had this video, and what we found out was that Windsor Locks had a beautiful main street. You know, storefronts, you know, the guys selling apples, you know, just you know, the old days, right? And they lost it. You know, urban renewal, right, came through, and now there's strip malls there with these huge parking lots that no one's going to, and they completely lost their main street. Well, this first selectman, he put this video together. It's probably still on YouTube if you want to see it. to the tune of Bob Seger's Main Street, you know, down on Main Street, right? And he's showing all these pictures. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. And so they're adamant about that, and they're adamant about getting the station being located in town as the catalyst for all of that. I could go on all night, but we are on Facebook and Twitter. We do have a website. You're going to see the NHHS rail. I think we've secured the hartfordline.com domain name. I tried it the other day, and it linked me back to our website. We're going to retool that website so it's less about construction and more about service launch. We have a vendor. We've got equipment coming. The locomotives are being overhauled right now. I just saw a picture of the new paint job. We just signed a lease deal with Mass DOT for coaches. They're going to get refurbished and wrapped in our colors. We should have a train set that we can show off to the press by February. So things are going to start rolling out. And with that, I think that's it. I'll take questions. Okay, so first question, what can we reliably expect? Here in Springfield, you'll get 12 trains a day. They'll be on time. And you'll have our fares are published because we just had the fare hearing. And I'll give you an example here. Springfield to New Haven, one way, $12.75. A monthly is $267. A 10-ride discounted fare is $114. So it's pretty good. Well, the towns are hungry for this. You know, the example of Meriden, can I reliably say there's going to be economic development around the stations? I can definitely reliably say that because it's already happened. I haven't even launched service yet. So there you go. I mean, Meriden really says it all. Windsor's following suit. Berlin has a number of initiatives that they're pursuing. I have developers that call me all the time about information. We just, our commissioner had a talk at a real estate group, you know, down in New Haven, and they were all over it. So, you know, we're pretty confident that this is going to be a big game changer. We have ridership estimates that we're pretty confident about. Personally, I think we're going to exceed them. A lot of people do. It would be a good problem. The infrastructure that we've built would be able to handle our growth. If we fill those trains, I would be ecstatic. You know, we would, you know, we could always lengthen the consists. You know, the platforms are 500 feet long. That handles. You know, you can get probably 7, almost 8 cars on that. You know, we've got the infrastructure in place to handle pretty robust opening and some growth. The parking, we've got 200 to 500 spaces at each station. So we're ready. The shiny penny, yeah, it was a shiny penny. It was quite an investment. From Massachusetts, you know, it really, and this is why you're all here, it really depends upon the service that Massachusetts wants. Right now, for the shuttle service that operates today, the 6 round trips a day, that's funded jointly by Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Vermont. The shuttles, the 4 shuttles, primarily by Massachusetts and Connecticut, and it's based on passenger miles. To extend service north from Springfield, that's an additional operating exposure to the state of Massachusetts. They have been talking to us about it. We don't have any definite plans. I couldn't give you a definite timeline, but I can tell you that we are in talks with them about expanding the service north. Well, Connecticut's not in great shape either from a budget standpoint, but and we are also you know, looking at making cuts, you know, just to maintain our ability to bond. the conversations that the commissioners had with the governor, this was his thing. He's absolutely committed to this. So we're launching in May. Right. So right now there's 6 Amtrak trains. That's going to go to 9 Amtrak trains, and it's a good. Actually, it gave me a good lead-in, something I wanted to cover. And then the additional trains to get to the 12 and 17, Connecticut puts those in under our vendor will be operating those. Our intention, we're working on it with Amtrak. I can't tell you that we've inked the deal yet, but it is our intention, and they are talking with us and cooperating with us to have a common fare for trips between Springfield and New Haven. So for instance, those dollar values that I just quoted, you would be able to board an Amtrak train for a trip between Springfield and New Haven for that price. They would accept the Connecticut fare media. We'll have ticket machines. We're going to have a ticket machine here in Springfield, and Amtrak would accept that ticket media under this deal. Once again, I can't say that it's inked yet, but we are in talks with them, and it's our intention to have that in place when we launch in May. Now, if you want to go Springfield to New York direct without a seat change, then you would pay the full Amtrak fare, a trip into Penn.
Two trains a day doing that?
No, for Springfield, you'd have a total of 12 trains running.
But you would have to change in New Haven for most of them?
Depends what train you're on. If you're on the regional or the Vermonter, it's a through trip. If you're
But there's only 2 trains a day.
There's only 2 trains that go through, correct. Right. That'll stay the same. But in New Haven, you have lots of options now, especially when you up the service to that from your perspective here in Springfield to 12 trains compared to 6. You've just doubled your options to make a connection. That's 6 additional trains that you can meet in New Haven for a trip that continues down, and now an option to meet the Metro North trains, for a trip into Grand Central or an intermediate stop somewhere else. I want to say maybe 10 minutes slower. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but it in rail terms it is for that length. It's 62 miles. So you can imagine the speeds on the line. Right now, the speed on the line is limited to 80 miles an hour. That's due to the signal system. We replaced the entire signal system. They got a brand new signal system, and so the maximum speed on the line goes from 80 to 110. I mentioned about reprofiling curves and inches of clearance on bridges and things like that. To eke out 20 miles an hour here and 20 miles an hour there. Those add up. It's really also about the reliability of the service. There was a section of track in Berlin that used to flood periodically that the rail would actually overtop, and Amtrak would have to walk the trains across this section of track as the water is sort of flowing over the tracks. There was a lot of historic drainage problems along the line that we corrected with this project when we set the stage for the second track, and it leads to a much more reliable service. And so, not only faster, is it 220 miles an hour? Well, you're not going to get 220 miles an hour here. You need to take a string line and pull it from Union Station here in Springfield and pull it down to Union Station, whatever's in the way, mountain, house, high-rise, highway, whatever, and plow through it, and that's how you get 220 miles an hour. So we're stuck really with the existing rail bed, which has quite a bit of curves in it. We did our best that we could with it, but what you get out of it is a much more reliable service. And so now, if it's an hour and 20 minutes, it's going to be an hour and 20 minutes. It's not going to be an hour and 20 minutes today and then 2 hours tomorrow because there's a slow order, because the rail embankment's eroding away in Newington. We've got a much more robust, and if you drive along the line and you get to sections where you can sort of see the rail bed, you'll see a lot of the work that we did in retaining walls, in track bed, in bridges and structures. Really, it goes back to the way it's funded. the rail line's funded under what I mentioned is PREA 209 service, so it's state-sponsored service. And so really, Amtrak is simply giving the service that the states are willing to pay for. And so if the states want more service, you know, they would have to pay for that. And if the states want more service and there's a capital investment required, then that capital investment comes from the states. In this case, this was an effort that was led by Connecticut. It was our governor's vision to have this. It had been talked about for decades. There's been studies going back, 20 years that talked about reinvigorating this line. And so the high-speed intercity passenger rail grants really gave us the ability, and at the time, Amtrak could not compete for those. The states had to compete for those. And so there's I'll get my number here in a minute. There's over $200 million that in federal money that we were able to secure for this. And so the states had to bring that to the table. So that's the NERI study. That's the Northern New England Rail Initiative. It's a separate initiative. Connecticut is, I've come to the meetings. We're not necessarily participating in it because we've done our part, by upgrading this line. This is the critical link. Everything funnels into that. If you don't have the Hartford to New Haven to Springfield section, then you don't have anything. But the NERI study looks at having more service Springfield to Boston, that section to Worcester, and then also increased service up into Vermont. Of course, the Montrealer is part of that. And then they came to the same conclusion that I always envisioned, is that you get to a very robust service, that 30-minute headway I talked about before, by overlapping all these services. So you might have a service that's sponsored by Vermont that could play into this. You could have MBTA service that extends out. You could have Connecticut service that overlaps and goes, makes the turn and goes towards Worcester. The states could enter into these partnerships that all these services start to overlap. That's so. And Springfield, of course, is right in the center. So it's possible. There's a lot to be done to make that happen. It'll be diesel powered, yeah. I often get asked, why not electrify it? It's about $500 million is the round number, for electrification. The advantages of electrification, the main advantage of electrification is an electric train comes up much faster than a diesel does. Electric cars are the same way. They accelerate much faster, so coming out of a station stop, you'd come up to speed that much quicker. With that, what do you get for your $500 million investment? You get 6 minutes between Springfield and New Haven. So it's not a lot of bang for your buck. Less pollution is a factor, and when I sell the service, when I come out and I talk about the service, and I've been in front of the microphone on this thing now since like 2010, 11, when we first started going after the grants, and when I went into the towns along the corridor, they were like, what? Oh, there's trains here, I could talk to you about congestion, but people seem to be okay with sitting in traffic. I could talk to you about pollution. Hey, I'm an advocate for that as much as anyone. There's a lot of good reasons for this, but what sells it? The economics sells it. It makes sense economically. It makes sense from a lifestyle perspective. There's development money here. There's economic growth here. It puts Connecticut in a position where now everyone's leaving because we're a suburban state and everybody's migrating back to the city. We were on the winning end of that for a long time with the big office parks. We had them all down in Fairfield County, and everybody was migrating out of the cities. And through the 70s, 80s, we were big winners, and our budget was fine back then because we were getting all that economic activity. And all of a sudden, all the big corporations are deciding, we want the talent pool that's back in the urbanized areas, and they're leaving. And we can't compete with that because our transportation infrastructure is not set up for it. If we can take the smaller cities that we have, which are tiny compared to Boston or New York, and link them, they could act as one bigger urban area. But it takes reliable, fast transportation to do that. there's a glitch in the high-level platform, something to do with clearances, and I can't recall the exact conversation, but they intended to build a high-level platform. I think for opening, they're still going to be on the low-level platform. For capacity, for us, not really a problem because you're end of the line right now. So, the train's gonna hold here anyway. So you have more time to board passengers, as opposed to being a mid-line stop where you want to have a 2-minute. You want to be in and out of there in 2 minutes. Here you're going to have the train sitting out there for a while anyway, so passengers will have more time to board. And the service is not dense enough that we're going to have 2 trains at the station, so it should work out. In the future, you fast forward, the NARI study, you got all this overlapping. Yeah, it's something to think about. Everything's going to be serviced out of New Haven. Yep. We have capacity there. It's a little bit of a shell game to move the trains around and get the Metro North trains out, get the Amtrak trains through, get all that stuff. But I just watched we model it. We used what they call an RTC model to model all the train movements, and I just watched the model run the other day, and it works. Connecticut has an obligation by statute to bid out any new rail service. And so we had to go out to bid for it. Amtrak did bid. There was actually, I think, 6 firms that we ended up interviewing, big players. What we call the TASI team, their subsidiary of Herzog, very, very experienced in running service around the country, and we got a very, very experienced management team. We're very happy with them, and they won out. Amtrak wanted to run some additional trains. They didn't want to run all of them. They did not have an interest in running 17 trains between Hartford and New Haven, and so it worked out well. I mean, it really wasn't much of a. I mean, there was no argument, on it with Amtrak. They said, "Hey, we want to run 3 additional train sets." We said, "Well, that's good because we don't have enough equipment to run all those trains, and so you guys can run 3 additional trains, and we'll run the rest." And they said, "Fine." And we got an access agreement in place that says that, and we have a service outcome agreement that was required by Federal Rail Administration that memorializes that. There is an existing Bradley flyer that runs from Hartford Union Station that goes to Bradley. But you'd have to time. You've only got 6 options. And Bradley is sort of a early out or a late back type airport. What we want to do is have the Bradley flyer go up to like running every 30 minutes. So that you don't have to think about it. And the benefit of coming out of Hartford. Now, originally, when I gave this speech, a couple years ago, we were talking about having a link out of Windsor Locks. Of course, the Windsor Locks station's not relocated to where it needs to be yet. But the Hartford option actually works pretty good because they can use the high occupancy vehicle lane. They can get to Bradley Airport, in not much more time than you would out of Windsor Locks. But the real benefit comes from the convention center. See, and there's a lot of people that come in, and I know because we have visitors that come down and do business with us in Newington, and at DOT headquarters, and they're all, "I'm flying to Bradley, how do I get down there?" I'm like, "Rent a car," which is sort of sad. Now rail down to Hartford at an increased frequency, but if you're flying into Bradley, you take the Bradley Flyer, which now runs at rate. It'll stop at Union Station and at the convention center. And we're going to make it real slick. We're going to have a messaging sign up there that shows the plane departures and the rail departures and so it has an integrated feel to it. Now it really puts the convention center in a much better position for attracting conventions and attracting people to stay there. And then plus it's just Hartford's really set up really well for that. And then you're linked right in with the fast track too. I'll tell you this from experience. I'm an engineer, okay, but my joke is I'm getting my law degree by on-the-job experience. Because the engineering's easy. The construction's easy. The legal documents and the agreements, that's the hard part.
And the price tag.
Yeah, I could have built 2 of these in the time.
And the price tag.
And the price tag. There's a synergy there that can work. Because the rail, the thing about trains is that they can't leave the rails, but the bus can. And so now you create these transit hubs, and you now can use your bus service. You know, if your rail line's running east-west, your bus lines start to run north-south, you know, and vice versa. And that, there's a synergy there. More people using public transportation is good for a bus company, be it rail or otherwise. Like I say, we're not in competition with CT Fast Track. We work off of each other. We're gonna be leveraging each other. That is right now. We want to direct the conversation towards the Bradley Flyer into Hartford. Like I say, Windsor Locks is not really set up for it yet. You know, I was an advocate for Windsor Locks. It made a lot of sense. I think it's a matter of us getting on the same page with the airport authority on that. I think there's real benefits both to us and to them when you talk about having that really strong, convenient, frequent link right into downtown Hartford, you know, from Bradley. From a business perspective, you know, I think that more so. The Windsor Lock Station is more sort of for, you know, the occasional traveler, you know, which there'll be a capture there, but airlines make their money on business travelers. I think that it's although it sounds somewhat convoluted, it's not going to add that much more time to your trip, and you're going to get, in the end, you're going to get much more frequent service. You know, because you're going to get off the train, you're going to wait in Hartford for 10 minutes, and you're going to be on the bus, and you're going to be going. The bus is going to be set up. We're going to have the baggage racks. You know, it's going to be set up as a slick airport service.